important that we point out the fact that to be a Christian is more than changing the name of your religion. One time in Madhya Pradesh, I met a magistrate who told me that in the area where he was responsible, a number of Catholics, a number of Hindus had become Catholics. And I asked this magistrate, who was a Hindu, I asked him, when these Hindus became Catholics, did it change their way of doing things? He said, not at all. He said, as Hindus, they drank. As Catholics, they continued to drink. As Hindus, they told lies. As Catholics, they continued to tell lies. As Hindus, they cheated. As Catholics, they still cheat. He said the only thing that happened to them was they changed their name from Hinduism to Christianity. And I explained to this magistrate, that is not at all what becoming a Christian is all about. And I explained that the Bible says, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. All things have passed away, and everything has become new. And this is the message that India needs to hear, that Christianity is far more than just belonging to a religion. It's having a change and transformation in your life. And of course, this is one of the things that Mahatma Gandhi used to have strong feelings concerning. If you're going to be a Christian, be a true Christian. If you're going to be a Hindu, be a true Hindu. If you're going to be a Muslim, be a true Muslim. That was his particular view. But he was simply pointing out that the name of the religion you hold is not nearly as important as the way you live. Or made the statement after visiting India. He said the greatest hindrance to the spread of the gospel in India is the Indian church. He said they have not learned what it is to really live as Christ has taught us to live. There's so much inconsistency, so many things taking place that are not right. And I think that's not only true in India, it's true in so much of the world, that our relationship with God needs to be strong. It needs to change our lives, change our way of doing things. Well, coming back to life in India as a young person in that nation, watching my father and mother, the dedication with which they lived, and then of course eventually I came back to America for the first furlough. I believe it was after about 6.5 years on the field. We had our first furlough. And we came by ship. We came on the Lloyd Tristino lines. We traveled from Bombay by ship to Italy. And there we got off the ship. And from Italy we traveled by train all the way to Southampton, England. And there we got on this ship, another ship, the Arance. And we traveled then from there to New York. And Lloyd Tristino had a special deal that if you would travel with them, they would discount that part of your travel where you went overland by train. They would pay for that. In other words, they would discount your boat ticket enough to pay for the train travel. So with no extra money except for food, you could travel by train across Europe. It was a great experience. And it was on that trip that we went to Rome, we went to Milan, we saw different parts of Italy, and we had a wonderful tour through Europe. And so eventually we came back, arrived in New York Harbor after being gone 6.5+ years. We arrived back in our homeland, and As our ship pulled into New York Harbor, we came by the Statue of Liberty. I shall never forget that. Many, many passengers were standing there on the deck of the ship as we came by the Statue of Liberty. There was hardly a dry eye as we looked at the Statue of Liberty and realized we were almost back in our beloved America. And our ship pulled up to the dock, and we looked down, and there was Brother Stairs and Brother Howard Goss and Brother Johnny Cade, we called him, Johnny Korlatowicz. These three men had come to meet us. And so we got off the ship, and they were there for us. They took us eventually to the 92nd Street Mission there in New York. Brother Howard Goss was pastoring the church in New York at the time. And so they arranged for us to stay right there. There was a bedroom that faced the main street, and then my father and mother had that bedroom, and then there was some other places where Fern and I stayed. And that was our first night in New York. And the next morning early, I heard a scream, and I went running into the bedroom of my father and mother to see what that was. And they were looking out the window. We joined them, and we were upstairs, and we looked down, and there was a man across the street. There was a man in his pajamas lying on the sidewalk. And then up above we could see a window was open. And inside that room there was a woman was screaming and crying. And they told us later that this man had jumped out of the window and committed suicide. And he was lying dead on the street. And that woman inside was screaming and crying because of this. That's the very first thing we saw the next morning after arriving in America, was a man just across the street jump out of a window to commit suicide. Well, Brother Goss and Brother Stairs then eventually took us by car up to Maine and to New Brunswick. It was the time of the camp meetings. We were in camp meeting in New Brunswick and in Maine, and every place we went, the people were so kind to us. We couldn't get over that. In India, everybody was wanting things. They were wanting us to help them, wanting money for food, wanting this, wanting that. Now we came back to our country, and everywhere we went, people were wanting to do things for us. We went to the concession stand on the campground to get a hamburger and a Coke, and they wouldn't let us pay for it. And everywhere we went, people were doing things for us, and it just made such an impact. The love that was shown to us, respect for missionaries, and so on. But that was the beginning then of our time in America. And of course, eventually we came to Oregon and entered the Bible school. And it was in the Bible school in Oregon that I again saw the girl that I had really fallen in love with when I was very young, and that was Audrine Haruza. Audrine Haruza I had known when my father pastored the church in Rupert, Idaho. And so even at that time, I thought she was a very wonderful girl. But then eventually our lives went different directions. We went to India, and she went to Tupelo Bible School for 2 years. And then after 2 years in Tupelo, she worked for 1 year at home and earned some more money. And then she came to Portland, to Concord Bible College, to finish her 3rd year. And it happened that was the same year that I went to Bible school there. And so we again met together. And at the end of that school year, then we got married. And after we got married, then of course, our furlough, or our honeymoon, was on deputation. we actually traveled on deputation for our honeymoon. And eventually we were ready to go to India. This time we flew to India by TWA. We went TWA to India. We went by Europe. And in Europe we met Ronald and Colleen. Ronald was in the army in Europe. So in Switzerland we met them, and we had a nice time with them in Switzerland. And then we went on to India from there. And when we got to India, I remember so well, and they opened the door of the plane and we came down the stairway, get off the plane. Audrine used to say that that humid, damp climate just hit her in the face like a blanket. She'd never felt anything quite like it before. And then, of course, as we arrived in the nighttime, we came along, she could see people sleeping on the street in Bombay. And so it was all new experience for her. And eventually we came by train. We came from Bombay by train down to Kerala. We got to Adur, and this was to be her new home. And of course the Malayalis were so excited to see all of us back again. And Brother Harry had come now with his bride, and here we were. They knew us, but they didn't know her. But they were happy that she was there, but she felt so strange. She didn't recognize them. They all looked the same. And so we showed her, this is going to be our room. And our room in the bungalow was the same room that my sister Fern eventually had, or had before that. Yeah, she had before that. So anyhow, that was our room, and she said she just went into the room and cried. She felt so alone, and she felt so strange, and she couldn't recognize anybody, didn't know any of these people. And that was the beginning of her life as a missionary in Travancore. And of course later on she just really learned to love the people, and they loved her very, very much. And eventually we moved from that house. We lived in the bungalow with my father and mother, and then we got our own little house not far away, just a small little house. There was no running water. We got our water from a well out in the courtyard, and it was just very poor. No flush, of course. We had just a sweeper come in and empty the commodes, and nothing of any modern sanitation at all. And we had brought our wedding gifts from America, some nice tablecloths and other things that were given to us. And one night in our little bedroom we heard some sound, and we wondered, what is that? And we opened up the wall cupboard where we had put our tablecloths and our wedding presents. And here we discovered that the termites were eating all of them. All of our wedding presents were destroyed by termites. And it was just full of termites. We had to throw all of our wedding gifts away. And so we lived there for a while. And then eventually we moved to a better house. This house was on the main road, and there was a garage that was actually on the road. We could park our car in that garage. By that time, the same year actually that Stanley was born, we got our first She's for Christ vehicle, which was a Jeep station wagon. We got his son and his Jeep station wagon the same year. So we were really blessed. And so we were now in a better house on that main road. It was in that house that one time the snake charmers came, and they got a big cobra from the back behind our house. And of course they got many other snakes too, but this particular cobra The boy that got this cobra was a young snake charmer, very young, and he was careless in handling that, and that cobra bit him. And that boy fell on the floor, on the ground. He was on the ground near the front of our house. And these other snake charmers had gathered around him, and they had a little bag full of herbs, like roots and herbs they get from the jungle. And they opened his mouth. They forced it open and put some of these herbs in his mouth and put water in. And then they put some of these herbs down where the snake had bitten him as well. And eventually he came to life. But apparently he was affected by that, because my sister Fern told us that 1 year later the same men came through our town again to the other bungalow, and this boy was there, but he was crippled. They said it was from that bite he got from the cobra. But anyhow, that's the same house where we were living when Stanley was just a baby. Was in that house that Stanley began to cry, having severe pain. And he cried so much, and his bedroom was right by the road. People could hear him crying, and we couldn't imagine what was wrong. And so we had arranged to go down to Cape Comorin, the very southern tip of India. And we decided on the way to stop in the hospital at Nagercoil, Nagercoil was about 40 miles south of Trivandrum. So we went to Nagercoil, which was a big Salvation Army hospital, to see Dr. Noble. He was an American doctor, famous doctor there. So we took Stanley to Dr. Noble. And we asked Dr. Noble, why is he crying so much? What is wrong? And Dr. Noble examined him, and Dr. Noble said that he has a hernia. And that is why he's crying. It hurts him so bad. And Dr. Noble said, I can operate, but I would rather wait till he's 1 year old, because it's so hard to control the urine, and that makes it difficult for the hernia to heal. So he said, you go on down to Cape Comorin, and let's see how he is after a few days. So we went on down to the Cape, and he seemed to be a little bit better. And then we brought him on home, and he was again crying. And Audrine and I went into the bedroom. We knew that if something doesn't happen, then he's going to have surgery. And I so well remember that night that we went into his baby bed where Stanley was laying, and he was crying, and we placed our hands on him, and we prayed in the name of Jesus that the Lord would heal him. And his crying stopped. And from that point on, he never cried again because of that problem. He never had to have surgery. He was completely healed of his hernia. And that was a very wonderful experience, how God healed Stan when he was just a baby. And another evidence of the fact that he does heal. So these are wonderful memories of the protecting hand of God, living there in Adur with all of the difficulties. Stanley was crawling on the floor one day, and we were all busy, and I came into the room, and Mary called. Mary is the same Mary that's working at the bungalow now. Then she was just a young girl. And Mary came running, and we wondered what's wrong. And she had spotted a lizard. A big lizard was making its way towards Stanley, and Stanley was crawling on the floor. And she said, this lizard is a very dangerous lizard. Now, some lizards are not dangerous. In fact, there are often lizards crawling on the walls, and they eat insects. They're not dangerous, but this was a dangerous lizard. and it could have been very, very hurtful to Stan. But there again, God protected him. And we saw so many times when the Lord kept his hand upon us, and I'm sure there are many other times we didn't even know that dangers were there. But God was protecting us and directing us. So we've always felt, you know, with Stan and Loretta, that God had kept his hand upon them for a purpose. And now we can see in their later life how God is indeed using them in such special ways. One day I was sitting in the bungalow in Adur in the living room, and a man came up to the window. Now, of course, we had no glass pane, so I went over and I pulled back the curtain and I asked him what he wanted. And I saw it was this Hindu sadhu. Well, he pulled his gown. He was wearing a gown. He pulled up his gown right up to his head to show me a scar. He had had an operation, so we needed to help him financially because of his operation. Well, when I saw that, I called my mother. Of course, he put his gown down, and I called my mother. I said, "Mother, come quickly. There's a man here who wants to talk to you." So she came into the living room and she went over to this man. And when he saw her, he pulled up his gown again, pulled it right up like that. And when he did that, she let a scream out of her and went running out of the room. And I was so highly amused. Thought that was so funny. But we did have some humorous experiences there for sure. And wonderful memories of life in South India. Mother had a desire to be active in the ministry. And she couldn't go out to many places because of the lack of bathroom facilities. And she used to get discouraged. She felt that she wasn't really doing much for the Lord. So I suggested to Dad one day that maybe she could teach Life of Christ. And so he arranged that. He made her one of the teachers in the Bible school. Then she got involved in first aid in the back porch. She had a regular dispensary going there. Many people coming with sores on their legs, and she would treat them and take care of them. So eventually she became very, very busy in her missionary work and seemed to be very, very happy.
I remember you're talking about going up to the season, you know, mm-hmm. and one of the seasons in Cody, of course, is I was born in April. So in 1958, the year that you've been talking about here,
yeah,
you must.
We are going now to continue some of the history of our missionary work and life in India. We completed, as far as we recall, the last tape that was made discussing the time that we spent in Adur after Audrine and I were married. We went to Adur, first of all, because Brother Stairs told us that he felt it would be good for us to teach in the Bible school for 2 years before we would go to North India. We had told Brother Stairs that it was our great desire to move to North India and open a new field for the church there. And of course that would involve going to Bible school, to language school as well. So Brother Stairs said that would be fine, but first we were to teach in Adur for 2 years. So we, after arriving in India, went to Adur, and we helped in the Bible school, which was actually started in 1957. And Audrine and I both taught in the Bible school, and after completing our work there for 2 years, then it was time for us to make our move to North India. By that time, God had blessed us with a son, and so we had a long journey to make from Adur all the way to Landour. This journey was not less than 1,500 miles, probably closer to 2,000 miles. And we made this trip in our new She's for Christ Jeep station wagon. This Jeep station wagon was a Willys Jeep, which we were given by the youth department, and we arranged for a special iron carrier to be placed on the back of the Jeep so we could carry some extra luggage. We did not have much in the way of worldly possessions, but much of it that we did have was carried in that Jeep. We did send 1 or 2 steel drums by rail to Landour, but many of the things we did carry with us as we traveled, so we had a very, very heavy load. We started from Adur, and that, of course, was a time of farewell when we told my father and mother and my sister Fern and all the national pastors and Bible school teachers goodbye. And there were some tears shed, and it was a sad time. As I look back on this time and I remember the beautiful attitude of my father and mother, I appreciate that so much, because they did not want to see us go. We were carrying quite a heavy load in the Bible school, and with our departure it would mean that more pressure of work would fall on them, but they never complained about it, and were happy that we were doing what we felt was the will of God. So we told them goodbye and made our way towards the north. Now, it was arranged with Brother Leslie Taylor, who was one of our pastors. He was actually an Anglo-Indian, and we had worked with him quite a bit. So he had friends in Katakavasla, which was near Bombay. This was the military, Navy, and Air Force training center for India. It would be comparable to West Point in the United States. So we met Brother Taylor, and he joined us and traveled with us all the way towards Bombay until we got to Katakavasla. And a rather interesting thing happened along the way. He often would hold Stanley. Stanley was just a small baby, and he said almost every time he held Stanley, Stanley would get him wet, and it was rather humorous. But anyhow, we made our way towards Katakavasla and finally arrived there and met the people who wanted us to have a special services. Now, this was kind of like a community church that had an interest in Pentecost, so they had opened the door for us to have services and to preach the truth of the gospel. And we started our services there, and right from the beginning there was quite an unusual work of the Holy Spirit. And each night the interest was increasing, and the Spirit of God was moving in the hearts of people. And it was evident that they were turning towards the Pentecostal faith. And this upset some of the leaders of the church. They did not want their church to become Pentecostal. So we were given a message by the leadership of this church and told that they were closing down the meetings and we would have to leave. And this gave us almost no time for any plans of what we were going to do. They virtually put us out and told us to be on our way. So I asked Brother Taylor what we would do for a place to stay that night, because they would not allow us even to stay longer in the home